Okay, possibly we can just start because no one is joining in the last minute. So welcome everyone to well, we had a long break since our last EuroDIG Extra. It was a format introduced during the time of the pandemic, but we found it's not just something that we could do when we have a pandemic. Hopefully, never ever again in that in this big form. But that it's also a nice format to meet throughout the year, discuss issues that are either hot topics or that are coming up during the year, where we would like to introduce something to the community, get feedback, or have a discussion about. And many of you might be aware that we started with a series of publications. The idea was born in the year 2018, when we said basically we have all the knowledge and such rich content on our EuroDIG wiki, but we would actually need it in a form which is a little bit more handy. And it was suggested that we reach out to authors that have a certain expertise in the field, usually called also our subject matter experts, and that basically go through all the transcripts, video material that is available of a decade of discussion on a certain cluster. Those clusters are the same as you will find them in the call for issue. You will recognize them by the colors here. And after the first 3 editions, we were able to produce 2 more editions this year. One was about youth participation, and youth participation in particular at EuroDIG, not on a global scale. And Nadia Tjahja, who is our EuroDIG coordinator and is doing research on youth participation in general, agreed to be the author for this publication. And then the second publication this year was just published recently during the IGF, was about human rights. And here the 2 subject matter experts that have been in place on this category, Farzaneh, Badii, and Jörn, Erbguth, agreed to work jointly together and make this publication. And we are very happy that all 3 of them are here today to introduce their findings and to enter into a discussion with you or to answer your questions. And I stop my screen sharing and I stop speaking, and I hand over to Nadia, who is the first presenter today. Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I've shared my screen and I hope that you can all see it. And I'm very pleased and honored to have been invited to reflect on youth participation in at EuroDIG. It is important that we continuously reflect on the processes, on how we engage with young people and the needs that they have. And a decade of youth participation allowed us to reflect on our philosophy, but also in the manner on how we're progressing and what is the future going to look like and how do we want to do that collaboratively. So I will briefly present my work, but while I am presenting my work, I would like to ask you to think about not only just what I'm saying, but do you have any experiences that you want to share, good practices that are happening in your communities? Are you concerned for particular communities that you are interacting with that may or may not have the resources or the knowledge to be able to come to somewhere like EuroDIG? And can we brainstorm perhaps a little bit on how to improve youth participation? Because that would be really wonderful when every year EuroDIG grows bigger, we have more diverse people attending. And at least at the very bare minimum, they know that things like this exist so that we can then provide them with the knowledge that there is an opportunity to engage in internet governance and that this is just the start and for them to reach out to go further. So a very brief background. Since 2009, youth has been an acknowledged stakeholder at EuroDIG, and that was found in at the very beginning in speeches that youth should be taken into consideration when we think about the future of the internet. In 2010, the Council of Europe organized the first Youth Roundtable, and 2011 saw Diplo Foundation organizing Internet Governance Capacity Building Program. And so we see at the very beginning that these organizations have an interest to participate, but this came from organizations themselves taking an interest. You see that in 2012, where youth themselves decided to organize a pre-conference to EuroDIG, and also thereby introducing the youth messages that were adopted into the EuroDIG messages scheme. From 2013 onwards, there was the new media summer school that was organized by Youth for Youth. But in 2017, that's where the Youth Dialogue on Internet Governance was institutionalized. And this is where I would like to start my speech from, so that we can build on what we have looked through and achieved, and what we would like to move forward with. So I'm going to start with the EuroDIG philosophy. If you look at our logo, which you see at the bottom, you see the capitalized U and a small the, and then you see the dig. It's the Youth Dialogue on Internet Governance. And the is the bridge between you and dialogue. And I think this is a very important component of what it means about how we look at our program. It's about young people not only discussing things among themselves, but discussing things with stakeholders and vice versa. Stakeholders are not coming to EuroDIG to talk at youth, but talking with youth in dialogue. Then what EuroDIG originally was built on was a form of Arnstein's ladder. Specifically, this Arnstein's ladder looks at how participation has developed. And Hart's ladder was built on that to specifically look at children's and youth participation. On that ladder, they looked at youth having a role in which youth would follow the lead from adults. So we see in the very first EuroDIG, there were the subject matter experts that were collaborating together with a youth facilitator to work on particular topics. So in collaboration, led by an SME. However, over time, this has changed. And the EuroDIG participation has now taken a form where there's a EuroDIG coordinator that is embedded in the EuroDIG Secretariat and works collaboratively on the logistics and focusing on the structure of the program. But you have the EuroDIG organizing team that then builds the program. This is something I'll go a little bit further on later. But in my research, I've been looking at how youth are participating. Where we start with this ladder. When this ladder was designed, what they would do is they look at particular activities, they would mark it manipulation, and they would assign specific activities according to what they thought it fit on the ladder. And I think that did not represent of how EuroDIG is being organized. EuroDIG is organized in terms of when you participate, you are not only learning from people, but you're also contributing because this is in dialogue. So I created a pyramid of participation, and you can see it's in 3 layers. The first is you're being informed, but you're also and you're given the opportunity to express yourself from your lived experiences. And this is important to acknowledge that when you are sitting in this room having these conversations, sharing your perspectives are just as valid because it's the lived experience that you have based on the access that you have to whether that's information or the internet itself. But as you go through EuroDIG, there are other opportunities available. If you become, for example, a member of the EuroDIG org team, you start going into these leadership roles. You see that you start working in partnerships together. We have sometimes EuroDIG participants who give a presentation. You sometimes see that in young people are moving forward and giving interventions, taking on leadership roles to show that they do have that expertise knowledge. And here where I'm talking about the EuroDIG org team, they have delegated power. They are designing the program themselves. and they choose the topics and how they want to contribute and see EuroDIG develop. So let me put this a little bit more concrete by going a little bit through the EuroDIG org team and the cycle. So the EuroDIG org team is composed of the EuroDIG coordinator, which is me, and I work closely together with the EuroDIG Secretariat. And EuroDIG itself is composed of former participants of EuroDIG, some of them from the year before who can reflect what they have just experienced and how they would like to improve upon that experience, but also those from cohorts before who have now entered the work field and are now in perhaps transition or have just completed a transition into a new field, where they can bring in that experience of, oh, this is something that would be interesting to include into conversations. So we have a wide span when we think about youth, because the youth ages start from, according to the Youth Coalition Internet Governance, start from 13 to 35. So encompassing a variety of different interests and backgrounds allows us to reflect better on the needs that happens across this age span. It is also diverse in culture, backgrounds, professions, and life stages. So we're not only talking about geographical or gender diversity, we're also talking about people who are coming from the health background, like doctors. We have people who are lawyers. We have people who have are students. So it is really varied that young people are participating, because they are so excited to be part of this this component of what it is, the internet, that it supersedes just particular fields. It actually goes into every single field. We also seek to maintain some institutional memory, which is through the EuroDIG coordinator, but also re-inviting EuroDIG org team members, so that there is a solid base of youth who understand how to participate in EuroDIG and continuing the philosophy that we have. And of course, it is important to us that as a regional organization of the IGF, that we also maintain a relationship with the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance. And in previous years, there were the Western European and Others Group steering committee members and the Eastern European Group steering committee member who have participated as EuroDIG org team member. And that is a really important way of ensuring that EuroDIG youth participants then also have the way to connect with the global. So starting at the beginning, when you apply to EuroDIG, we don't ask you for your background. We don't set a specific high standards. The threshold is low because we want to make sure that everybody has access to this opportunity. We focus on newcomers that want to learn about the field and get involved. And therefore, it's fully funded. And only reason why you're not fully funded is if you indicated yourself that you only wanted to have accommodation support, or you decided to be self-funded. Our outreach strategy focuses equally on academic communities as working youth. So it's important to us that we manage to access that large spectrum of people who consider themselves youth. And our application form is reviewed by the EuroDIG org team, because they themselves are the people who submit the application form themselves. They know what difficulties they had when they submitted it. What were the criteria that we set for them? And that application form can reflect then the needs and understanding that allows young people to be successful in their application. And therefore also the criteria of the selection is every year reviewed to make sure that it allows certain circumstances to be accommodated for. So when we then focus on the agenda building and the program design, we look first at the application form, because the youth applicants submit some ideas about what do they want to learn, what are they interested in. We bring that together to have an understanding of what are these ideas that people are currently interested in. We then also look at the EuroDIG call for issues and look at particular topics that we find interesting that we would like to consider, or we see that there are particular themes that are incredibly important that we think are going to come up at EuroDIG, and then we make sure that we plan sessions support young people to understand how to participate in that topic. But we also allow the EuroDIG org team to showcase their expertise. They themselves over time have been working on issues related in internet governance. Some of them are working professionals, some of them have a particular interest that they're researching. So allowing them the opportunity to showcase some of the things that they want to share with the community and then foster peer-to-peer learning. This can be a topic that they want to do a workshop on. So it's not always a lecture. It can also be group and team building exercises that allows us to understand how things work. For example, last year we did a session on AI. We had a lot of AI program software that people were keen to understand. So we had a discussion about how do you use it, why you use it, and how it was created. So allowing an interest and fostering that interest and sharing that with others allows for that peer-to-peer exchange. Our program design focuses on making sure that there are pre-event webinars to meet each other, to have already a feeling for how we are communicating with each other. We're coming from very, very wide places all over the pan-European region. And then for 3 to 4 days, you are meeting each other. And because time is so short, you don't have the time per se to really get to know each other well. So we do want to have the pre-event webinars to, first of all, give you an introduction to core internet governance topics, but also to overcome that initial threshold of you arriving and not knowing who everybody is. You're there and you can start the conversations immediately already based on the conversations that you had in the webinar. We use formal and non-formal teaching methods, and that range based on lectures, panels, but also doing workshops, games, doing tours around the city, looking at the internet infrastructure. And those are really fun to have conversations about. And as I mentioned, it's dialogue focused. So we do enjoy the exchange, and we look for speakers or people who want to engage with us and often have a very active profile in terms of how we can engage with each other that is fun and allows us to showcase things that come from our different backgrounds. So the youth messages were introduced by the Nordic Youth IGF, and it was continued through the new media school. But in 2019 onwards, I introduced the concept of syntegration, which is a process which is structured and non-hierarchical and brings together different communication methods and engagement styles. So for example, most people that you would know communicate by speaking, and it's often easier for extroverts to then contribute to conversations than introverts. The structure allows different times and moments where you have different forms of communication methods that shine. You have moments where you have to commit to writing things on Post-its so that you bring ideas together. We have feedback moments where we visualize things and reflect on the manner in which you have time to think about a topic first before committing to saying something out loud. You also have moments in which you can discuss things informally before discussing things for the entire group, to just test your ideas before you exchange that. And allowing this communication methods and engagement styles will overcome, hopefully, many different ways of people who are shy or people who are here for the first time engaging with an international audience and just need time to adapt accordingly, and gives moments of reflection for those people who want to think or research ideas and topics before they contribute for informed decision making. But that also means, because we focus on the ideas from participants, that we're not all content experts. So the process is focused on just the process. So the facilitators are process oriented, and they don't contribute to the content unless they are asked to and they have that expertise. So that the participants are not limited by the restrictions that are being set by a facilitator that try to guide you in a particular way. We try to keep the process as open as possible and allowing for the youth to really shine, to express themselves. And we hope that that allows us to find new ideas and really share concerns that they have themselves. So the key question they then have to answer is what are the issues and concerns that impact you or your community that you want to raise to the attention of decision makers at EuroDIG? And you can see at the youth messages that you can see on the on the EuroDIG website that the answer to this can be very wide. It has ranged from human rights to cryptocurrency, from disinformation to government to e-governance. So youth have been confronted by a variety of different issues and want to raise that to the table. And by allowing us to talk about these youth messages, it gives them some concrete topics, some concrete ideas that have been tested, that they have discussed, that they can then bring forward to EuroDIG. So when you come to this big international event where you're meeting a lot of people and you don't know for sure whether or not what you're saying is relevant or contributing to the conversation, having had this moment and knowing that you have a message to say and that you have discussed with these people the different perspectives of this message allows you the confidence to be able to go to these stakeholders and say, we discussed this and we think this is important and we would like to have this discussion with you. So we do have moments of this reflection and feedback that before we then go into EuroDIG. So after the youth messages, we do have moments where we reflect on how difficult the multi-stakeholder process is. So we only discuss the things that we found important, but if you also have to consider other things like legislation, cultural backgrounds, and things like that, we reflect how open we need to be and understanding, and that we understand that in different cultures, things work differently. The infrastructure is not always the same. So we take a moment to reflect that when we do go to EuroDIG, we try to go with an open mind and trying to understand and share our experiences and trying to fight for things that are important to our community and making sure that people understand the difficulties that we're going through, but being open that the experiences are very different. And that's why we also do skills and capacity building, such as networking, advocacy, activism, and lobbying. So to understand how different forms of presenting your ideas to different types of stakeholder works. And then we had the very, very big privilege of being able to present the EuroDIG messages in a variety of different fora, such as we've been offered the keynote at EuroDIG for several years now, and it is always a highlight of EuroDIG participants. And this is something that they always come back to us saying how incredibly important that moment is, that they are there and acknowledged by the international community that they have these ideas. Not only that, it's included in the EuroDIG messages and often presented at the IGF. The EuroDIG messages are also sent to the European Commission, the European Parliament, and Council of Europe, and sometimes this has led to invitations to meetings with high-level stakeholders, such as the former EU Commissioner Mario Gabriel and the former Secretary of State for Economic Affairs and Climate, Mona Keiser. But EuroDIG is not just EuroDIG. EuroDIG is also at EuroDIG, and EuroDIG participants take on a variety of different roles to engage in participants. They are speakers. In previous years, they have also been remote moderators. They have also contributed to org teams, and they are very proud to be able to take those different roles, not only when they are EuroDIG participants, but also after EuroDIG when they return. As a EuroDIG participant, it's sometimes intimidating to come here as a first timer, not knowing everyone, but having that peer-to-peer support, not only knowing each other, but if you have a question that you would like to ask to a speaker, having a moment where you can show a piece of paper to someone and say, hey, I would like to say this question. Do you think it's a good question? And having a group to support you is incredibly important. And that allows for community building. We have a strong community. So 1/3 of EuroDIG participants have returned after their first time at EuroDIG, and they're comfortable submitting issues. Between 2017 and 2022, they submitted 100 proposals, and they are keen to make sure that their ideas are on the agenda. And they find it comfortable because it's an issue that they have to submit. So it is only what they think is important to be on the agenda. So those who do not return to EuroDIG is often because they do not have the resources to come back, financial, or time even, because if your job doesn't allow you to come back, or your family needs you, you're not able to then return to EuroDIG. But also long-term participation cannot be aligned with long-term planning sometimes. So you have young people who are participating who would like to come back, but for example, if their area of expertise isn't technology specific or internet specific, it is, for example, you're an educator who's interested and you would like to come back to EuroDIG, but that does not fit within the role. So you cannot find the funding regarding that to be able to participate. Or they go into directions where they are not able to contribute to these spaces. For example, that they join organizations that doesn't allow them to represent, even if they go as an individual, they're not allowed to represent the company. So they rather not let you attend these spaces. And then I come to the towards the final of my presentation, which is EuroDIG at the IGF. So going from that entry to the regional and now to the global IGF, many think that accessing the IGF is difficult, firstly, because of the lack of financial support. But then when people do attend, it often relies on participation from neighboring countries. So when the IGF was held in Paris, for example, it was easier for a lot of people to come to the IGF when it was held in Germany, because it has so many neighboring countries around, it was easy to get to those spaces. So therefore, they are able to participate. Submitting session proposals in comparison to EuroDIG are far more high threshold. At EuroDIG, you submit an idea, an issue that you want to put on the agenda for people to discuss and come together with different expertise. A session proposal, you need to have the background and then be allowed to enter the session proposal section. If you don't have that network, you don't have the background, you can't contribute. But luckily, we do have a youth structure where young people do support each other, that if you want to submit a session proposal, former EuroDIG participants have said, we will rally together around each other to help you submit the session proposal that you would like to have. And that has been really successful. But also on the ground, navigating the IGF can be overwhelming when many things are happening at the same time. But luckily, they do use the EuroDIG booth as a beacon. They come to the EuroDIG booth when they're not sure where they're going, and they come and talk to the people that are standing at the booth, whether or not that is Sandra, Reiner, or anyone from the EuroDIG community that is just coming there to visit. They ask about what sessions should they be attending, who should they be meeting, what topics are important on the agenda that they should keep an eye out to make sure that they're not missing out on something big that is happening that's going over their head. So the EuroDIG booth has been incredibly important to ensuring that the youth community comes together, connects with the EuroDIG community, and then goes into the relevant sessions when they don't know where to go. So we do see the EuroDIG community coming together to support each other. And a lot of this support relies on good mentorship, finding someone at EuroDIG or being introduced to someone that helps them navigate. So a EuroDIG member that comes and sit next to them, recognizes them like, hey, you're a youth digger, I'm going to sit next to you, and have a little bit of a conversation, introducing them to other people who are walking on the internet governance field. And that has been so incredibly important. So my research does not stop with this EuroDIG publication. I have also written about youth meta participation at the IGF, where young people are creating their own spaces. I've talked about who are youth and how are youth navigating themselves. But my most recent publication is I looked at how EuroDIG are actively participating in the different activities on regional and global level, and understanding the dynamics of meaningful youth participation. And I would like to thank the EuroDIG Secretariat, the Gremlin Project, for all your support to allow me to work on this publication. And also I would like to thank Michael Ojia for reviewing and editing my work. And thank you all for your attention, and I hope that we can have a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I recognize there was one question in the chat from Farzaneh, and she was asking, how about connectivity? Are they concerned about connectivity, about that? Are they concerned about that? And this was on the question on the topics that youth is looking into.
So thank you so much for that question. So I would say yes and no. So It wasn't added to the EuroDIG messages, but we did have a really big discussion about that 2 years ago. We had someone who is a part-time farmer. And this part-time farmer was on a farm that does not have access to an infrastructure, so they're not using digital technologies to be able to maintain their crops. So when everybody's saying they had access to the Wi-Fi, they don't have that on the farm. And the reason they don't have access to that infrastructure was because the landscape is protected, so they're not allowed to build on that. So there was big questions about what is the balance between protecting our environment, so sustainability, protecting Mother Earth, and ensuring that people had access to the internet. And the answer is that it seems that we can raise this question, and we wonder whether or not one or the other has to give. Do we create these infrastructures at cost of the landscape or of Mother Earth, or the other way around, that some people might not, in certain areas, in specific designated areas, may not have access to this particular type of technology to protect the world that we live in. But because because it wasn't for something concrete that they could lobby, it was not something that they could say, how can it's only raising the question. It wasn't something that they could give an opinion or have a discussion about. They didn't add that to the EuroDIG messages.
Hey, okay, are there any other questions to Nadia? Then please speak up now.
Maybe I can. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Nadia. It was great. And I think yeah, the point you mentioned with the EuroDIG booth at the IGF, it's a particularly good point, particularly for EuroDIG, but also for the others. When you see conferences like the IGF, where you have so many people going in their siloed session, not seeing anything else, and not interacting, it's really easy to get lost. And it is important to kind of give some connection, some grounding to the community there. So I think this is a great thing that you and of course the whole EuroDIG team does there, particularly for EuroDIG, but also for other EuroDiggers.
Thank you so much for your comment. Yes, I was always surprised when someone mentioned it, because they felt really lost. And then I found a EuroDIG booth, as if, you know, the specific example I'm thinking about was in Germany. They just went for coffee, and then Rainer was standing right opposite the coffee, and they could have a little bit of a conversation. So where do I go? Who do I talk to? Navigating across the space, I'm interested in this. And then either sending them to other booths or sending them to particular sessions. But also people like Thomas Schneider, Chris Buckridge often just hang around the EuroDIG booth and are happy to share what people should be going to, and they're really appreciative of it. But also when youth diggers see members from the EuroDIG community, seeing those familiar faces, and because the EuroDIG community is so open, they will just walk up to someone and ask them. And the thing that makes me always the most happiest is when the EuroDIG community members walk up to youth diggers and say, hey, I recognize you, or hey, let me come and sit with you. And then just sit there and they're like, oh yeah, explaining, oh, IPv6 is this, IPv4 is that, and it's important for this reason. So explaining a little bit about what are the issues that are going around and why do we think that is important, rather than they are arguing and I understand the argument, but not understanding the context in which that argument lives. EuroDIG community members are so in that way, and for allowing people to understand the context of which these discussions live in. And I think that is something that we must value, and that we must certainly support and continue to encourage other community members to engage in, because that knowledge transfer, that extremely informal knowledge transfer, can really change the way how a young person navigates the Internet Governance Forum and even EuroDIG.
it's also for us really rewarding to hear that the booth has an additional serves an additional purpose rather than just promoting messages and distributing material. And of course, we also like the situation very much when the booth can be a meeting point for a bigger group and when interaction is taking place there as well. So we will, as long as possible, continue having a booth at IGFs, but you must understand that it's always quite a big hassle to get the material shipped to the other part of the world sometimes, and to finance the travel costs for 2 people to go. So it is quite a big thing to do a booth, although it looks so easy.
But I mean, I certainly appreciate it, and the EuroDIG community certainly appreciate it. And that being also a beacon for mentorship is also very important. It's also how I met Farzaneh, and who introduced me to the Global Internet Governance Academic Network, so that I could then eventually now do my PhD. So the world is extremely small. If you have the opportunity of people just taking a moment, because my conversations with Farzaneh are generally not very long, but every time I do have the opportunity to meet her, just small things that change everything for some people.
It's very good to hear, Nadia. Are there any other questions? I see there is some comments, but not really questions in the chat. But if you have a question or would like to take the floor, then please do it now. Otherwise, we would switch to the next segment of this EuroDIG Extra. And that goes to Jörn and Farzaneh on the publication on human rights. Farzaneh kindly already shared the direct link in the chat. And I give the floor to both of you, and I'm sure you have discussed who is going to start, whether it's Farzaneh or whether it's Jörn. So floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Hi, everybody. I know almost all of you. My name is Farzaneh Badii, and I'm the founder of Digital Medusa. I lived in Europe for 10 years. I was actually trained in internet governance in Europe. So, and I was involved with EuroDIG for a few years as the subject matter expert of human rights. And let me just do this properly. Yes. Then I moved to the US, and Jörn took over and has done an amazing job at EuroDIG as the subject matter expert. So we wrote this report together, which was a very collegial way of doing it, and I think it was very objective as well, at least. I believe that. So I'm going to cover the first 5 years, and then Jörn is going to cover the next 5 years. And I'm going to go for like 7 minutes and then pass it on to Jörn. So for me, my impression of human rights at EuroDIG was in Europe was that it was the case of, like, there was this movie called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, who started like a very old and frail, and then as the movie progressed, he became young and flourishing, and then became a kid, and then died. And human rights at EuroDIG, the discussion started while Europe always paid attention to human rights discussions. It started as like not being a theme, but a topic that people paid attention to in 2008, but it doesn't mean that, but they still discussed fundamental rights. And I always say this, and I saw it in the report as well, that For Europeans in the beginning, and the discussion at EuroDIG, we see that there are a lot of discussions about like these emerging topics that we're talking about now. Like 20 years ago, they were more about like empowering users than enforcing rules. It was more about like, for example, they had media literacy instead of like heavy focus on trust and safety in the matter of content moderation or account blocking. And always when they talked about content moderation, about what we call these days trust and safety, they always had freedom of expression and other human rights values in mind. Then we go to 2010, and human rights become its own theme and like very established. And this doesn't mean that while human rights became a theme, it doesn't mean that it was not a cross-cutting theme in other discussions as well. And then the discussions were going towards more about like how copyright was a challenge, and kind of like they were like how copyright kind of provided like created challenges for human rights and on the internet, for freedom of expression, for access to knowledge. And it was more about these things, and as I said, empowering users to operate on the internet and like in a healthy internet environment. And the internet was an enabler. It was not a threat to human rights. It was the enabler of human rights. It was like they were very positive. Then we come to so in 2011 we see a lot of emphasis on corporate responsibility in protecting human rights. This is when all these other networks also are flourishing around the world, like, you know, ranking digital rights and global network initiative. So to kind of like look at these corporations, and at the time, like Facebook was also like Facebook and these other social media platforms were also gaining a lot of traction. So they focused on that, but also there was a lot of emphasis on human rights protection at the infrastructure level, at the like the ISPs and telecom companies. Then we go to 2012, and then we see that there's some emphasis on rule of law, be tough on crime. Always there was the human rights aspect to it. And it didn't matter, like the government, the civil society, corporations, all the stakeholders, they emphasized the importance of human rights. But it was in that year, kind of like see this thing emerging, that whatever is illegal offline should be illegal online. And that's a lot of trust to put in our laws. I mean, I know like we are like following democratic principles in Europe and all that, but it's kind of, I think my perception was that there was a shift from like being creative and empowering the users and protecting human rights to more of like a rule of law discussion and you know, and making and being tough on crime online. And it took away that kind of like creativity that that we were supposed to have on the internet, because it was a new thing, and not repeat the mistakes that we actually make on offline. So then 2013 happened, and right before EuroDIG in 2013, took place. Snowden revelations. The article about the Snowden revelations was published in Guardian, and that was kind of a shift of focus. But I gotta say that Europe never lost sight of EuroDIG never lost sight of surveillance, and blanket surveillance is not is against human rights. It has to be proportionate and targeted. But then there were only a few mentions of data localizations. Cross-border data flow was still a human right thing, and internet governance principles, they wanted to protect internet governance principle. Then we come to 2014, and we go from maximizing, in Europe, in EuroDIG, the human rights themes, we were talking about maximizing human rights. It was not balancing until 2014 that we started talking about balancing human rights and the digital sovereignty issues that were discussed more and more, and we blame a large part of it, of course, on in Snowden revelations as well. And in 2015, the human rights discussions were still flowing, but it was more about digital market. But there was also talks about cross-border data flow. How do you actually protect human rights locally, but also have the cross-border data flow? And with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Jörn.
Thank you, Farzaneh. So you really described the move from human rights centric, from human rights enabler and protecting the internet from those who might restrict it and thereby restrict the human rights enabler, towards regulating and towards limiting the human rights risks coming from the internet. And of course, 2016, we had huge trust issues in government, in the internet, in internet companies. The NSA was caught spying. We had the Snowden revelations, like you said, and the NSA used the PRISM program involving all the internet companies. So there was a real trust issue. And at the same time, there was a move that governments were preparing to taking a stronger role. And they proposed a human rights-oriented digital European economy. And this was the time the GDPR was went into force, and the idea was that if you have an environment with higher human rights, with higher privacy standards, and other countries will adopt these standards, which this prediction came true, this will be an economic advantage for European digital companies. But this second prediction did not really come true. But the idea was, if we create environment with higher human rights, with higher privacy standards, it could be very beneficial to European companies as well. So it was not meant to create bureaucracy, but to create an advantage for European companies in this respect. So like a win-win situation to protect the users and to create an advantage for companies. And until 2017, Microsoft proposed a digital Geneva Convention that was asking for asking governments to restrain from hacking, unless in very specific circumstances. And governments did not really like this initiative, so this was not supported. And while there was more regulation coming, this regulation mainly went towards internet companies and users and not towards governments. And in 2018, finally, the GDPR started to be applied, and we had the first regulation that is going to really protect technology, protect users when technology is being used. And the GDPR has high fines, is really an effective means, or maybe some people still dispute it, but compared to prior tools, it's really effective means in regulating internet companies. And of course, the community was skeptical. Can the GDPR really protect the human rights aspects, the privacy aspects of users? And of course, we have kind of a mixed summary of efficiency of GDPR. In some respects, it is really efficient. In some respects, the result is kind of mixed. And other topics at the same time were coming as well. So we were discussing Internet of Things, blockchain, AI, and together with these new technology, the feeling of risk was increasing. So the feeling was on one hand side, well, this technology can enhance human rights. This was still there. But at the same time, there was a feeling these technologies will be used by big corporations to restrict our human rights. So we need protection from these technologies. Not only we need the possibility to use them to enhance human rights. And in 2019, several panels looked at technological solutions like privacy by design. So if you build the right technology, you can protect human rights by design and not by regulation. And this approach was very welcomed by the community because there was still some skepticism about regulation. But of course, this approach can't catch everything. And it is also privacy by design is being enforced by regulation, by GDPR. And then in 2020, everything changed with COVID. We had to have several online-only EuroDIGs. And this brought into play a situation where suddenly all those technology was used by the masses. So before it was kind of a playing ground for interested people, for people who were engaged in this field. And now everybody had to use it, whether they were keen on using it or not, but they were forced to. And of course, the mass usage of technology also brings new challenges. So we were asking, what is the impact on privacy? Also, is GDPR really working when we saw that urgently needed tools were not GDPR compliant, and we were we had to decide whether to use non-compliant tools or not communicate at all. So we had to see that there were some deficiency in the real world when it was really brought to the test. And in 2021, we had a similar thing with the identification, with the COVID passports. Digital IDs is a huge topic, and suddenly this topic was not academic anymore, but this topic was a real world topic. Everybody was using it. And so we were talking about privacy, about COVID tracking, and about vaccination certificates and test certificates. How do they work? How do they protect privacy and human rights? What risk do they are regarding privacy and human rights? And another disruption, of course, was in 2022 with the war in Ukraine that escalated. And suddenly security played a much bigger role. And while we wanted, of course, to reduce propaganda, at the same time, there was a fear of internet fragmentation and disruption. So how far do we want to enforce our values using the internet? And how far do we want the internet to remain a neutral medium, a neutral tool where we do not want to enforce our political views, our even our views on human rights, but we say this is a neutral tool, this is basic and can be used for by everybody. And basically this is a main question behind the regulation that we see. Will the regulation be neutral and open and respect European values, of course? Or will it be a means to enforce the interpretation of European values to the users, and particularly also to those users that might disagree with the interpretation of certain values? And we see a tendency to the later. And in 2023, when we were in Tampere in Finland, just a neighboring country to Russia, of course, this war was very present in the discussions, and we had to see where are we going, and there is an increasing trust towards governments that they will do a good regulation, or at least they hope that government regulation is needed, and therefore that government regulation is better than no regulation. But of course there is still skepticism about, well, will it do the job? Will it really protect human rights and only prevent those usages that we want to be protected from? And if you can go to, yeah, you already did. So the conclusion that I would like to do together with you, Farzaneh, is, well, we see that we need regulation. We need to protect human rights by regulation. And at the same time, we need to preserve the balancing of powers, that we have checks and balances, and that the government is not the one who dictates everything, but we use the entire rule of law and democratic system to balance power and have the right checks and balances in there. And so we see that GDPR is the one example that is sets the precedent of a regulation, a strict regulation that is welcomed by most of the actors. Although some complain about bureaucracy, there is no dispute whether this regulation is good or not. And at the same time, we see a copying of this approach in almost a dozen new regulations. And we will see how this will well, shape the future European internet, and how this can be, of course, connected to the worldwide internet, to the UN Global Compact, UN Digital Compact, and to see how this will interplay. And so the risks of regulation and increasing government power, they are still there, they are not gone, and we have to be a watchdog at EuroDIG to pay attention that the government is being watched, and that we put the finger into places where we see that there is a risk of human rights not being respected enough. Maybe you, Farzaneh, you would like to take over?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just didn't know how to unmute myself. Yes, that was perfect, Jörn. I also think that we kind of like, we see this kind of shift from being human rights oriented to being more like having like more regulatory approaches, while there is emphasis to reconcile the two. It has proven to be a challenge, and I especially believe that like the last bullet point, that EuroDIG, as EuroDIG was kind of like the hotbed of the discussions on human rights and the internet, and that community, which they brought it up, they made it a mainstream topic, and by that community I mean the multi-stakeholder community, the governments. Like in the report, if you look over it, a lot of the speeches they start mentioning human rights and how it should be upheld. And I think that having EuroDIG as the human rights watchdog of Europe, human rights and the internet, would be very, very valuable and appropriate, because this is the community that advocated and advanced human rights on the internet, if I'm allowed to claim that. But yeah, so totally agree. It was great collaboration.
Yeah, I think it was great to writing the report together. So we had great discussions, and I really enjoyed it. When we see that multi-stakeholder governance is changing, and we see a more top-down approach kind of taking over, we have to find a new role for IGF, for EuroDIG. And of course, we should try to keep the multi-stakeholder approach alive as long as possible. But we also have to see that, well, regulation is king. So you can publish a lot of papers, but if regulation has been done, then there is little discussion left. So we need to adapt to this new situation where the internet governance will still be a precursor of a certain regulation, but we also have to take over the evaluation part, where we see that regulation might actually not always do what it should, and needs to be fine-tuned to really advance the goals. And I think this is also an important part that EuroDIG should focus on. And I think particularly when you look at the European regulation, one important point is that we really should copy the approach of the GDPR, where we have independent data protection authorities, and not copy the approach of the DSA, Digital Services Act, where most of the power is concentrated at the European Commission. So I think these are little differences that make a big difference can make a big difference concerning human rights.
I think that sounded like a little bit like your final word for the time being, Jörn. Thank you very much, both of you. It was really a pleasure to listen to you, and I must say I still learned a lot, although I have been possibly witnessing the discussion throughout the years. Cannot participate in all the session itself, but having such a holistic summary about what happened is really of great value for me. And also the role that you see for the IGF and for EuroDIG to be a watchdog on how the human rights discussion elaborates further is something that I take back to the Secretariat's work and the count on, of course, your and the community's help to make that happen. There were no questions in the chat, but I would like to ask our participants if they would like to bring up a question or a comment, then raise your hand or just raise your voice as you wish. There is applause from Dennis.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I have a question. Is there one or two specific topic that any one of you foresees as being the next big issue in terms of human rights? Or let me put it the other way around. Do you see any trend in the human rights discussion for the years to come?
Well, one big topic currently is, of course, the AI Act, which is in its final stage. And we will have from the EDV Gerichtstag, we will have a discussion on the 15th on this topic. And I guess many other organizations are currently also discussing this. And we see a tendency started from the Chinese government saying, well, we don't want neutral AI. We want AI that is pursuing our values. And Biden has said the same thing. He wants AI to pursue equity. And the UN Secretary General said the same thing. AI should support the SDGs 2030. And I guess the EU will join them as well. So the question is neutral, or do we have like a governance sitting on our shoulder when we use AI that will make us, let us make the good decisions? So I think this can be a huge topic when we will be increasingly using AI tools. How far can we make independent decisions there? And how far will we be governed by AI that is pushing us into a specific direction?
Thank you, Jörn. There is a question in the chat, and I see Roberto has raised his hand. I read out the question so that we have it on the record. The question comes from Nadia. Could you further comment on the intersection between multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism in relation? How this will impact the right to participate in public affairs? And do we need to create institution or convert EuroDIG as an institution to be able to participate? And Farzi answered in the chat already that she's happy to take the question so far. So I give the floor to you.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, so I am originally from Iran. And that is a very specific case. It's an authoritarian country. A lot of other like European countries are actually a bit more democratic, fortunately, for now. But with the multi-stakeholder process, as somebody who's from this authoritarian country that always wants to control citizen participation in these global forums, I could participate in ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. I could participate in the in all the various multi-stakeholder processes, and I could bring that human rights perspective that the government wanted to quash to the processes. But if we have only multilateral processes, then that kind of participation is not possible for civil society, and that will have grave consequences for upholding human rights on the internet. Because I know that we want to trust the government and say that they will represent us, but sometimes that's not enough, and sometimes they don't represent us. So we need to have these processes in place, and also there's also the operational aspect of this. that, you know, without the participation of different actors who operate the internet in these processes, it's not possible to regulate it. If you regulate it, if you govern it that way, you will break it. So for EuroDIG participation, fortunately, at the moment, we have upheld most of the multi-stakeholder principles. So, as an institution, if it wants, like, it can go to IGF, it can go to other forums, it can go to ICANN. And Sandra has been doing all this fantastic work, but for, like, I think that it's a like, the future will be very grim for internet governance if we do things at the ITU level, even if we can get like an observer status, because observer status is really not participation. So we need to really focus on that. There was another thing that I just wanted to mention after your discussion on AI thing. I really encourage EuroDIG to look at AI and its intersection with internet governance. This is why we are here. We are not talking about like artificial intelligence in space. We want to talk about how artificial intelligence actually affects our internet governance institutions, our internet governance operations. And I see that getting lost all the time in these kind of conversations. So if we want to talk about emerging technology, it has to be in relation to internet governance. That's why we're here, right?
And it's sometimes hard to draw the line, Farzi. You know that possibly from reviewing the proposals that come in when you see how people look at those issues. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Roberto. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think that what I'm saying is probably connected with the last observation from Farzi, that is about internet governance for emerging technologies. Last week, I was in Trieste at the ICTP, and I attended a workshop on communication in extreme environment that went over a lot of things, from touching on community networks, support of underserved communities, but also on technologies that are emerging, like the 6G, sixth generation mobile, how in the future regular internet networks may be connected in a wider scheme of telecommunication with what is called non-terrestrial communication, and generally speaking, there is the need for whenever these new technologies come up to make sure that we have a scheme of internet governance that will bring all multi-stakeholder to discussing these issues, and not letting jumping in when after the fact, trying to patch the decisions that have been taken by commercial interests and government. So I have no specific topic like AI to present, but I can tell you that there will be several points that will be raised in the call for issues for EuroDIG 2024. And I think that we have to, I completely agree with Farzi, we need to pay attention to emerging technologies and to develop a scheme of internet governance sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe
Go
sorry.
ahead.
So when I'm also in a German association, and we get a lot of we do a lot of commenting on proposals for new laws. So it's a regular way that if there's a new law, if the civil procedure is adopted to allow digital processing of whatever in front of courts, then we comment on this. And this commenting is something which exists and which kind of works, but also which is often ignored by governments. So they often give only 1 or 2 days time, and you can be sure that your comments will not have a huge impact. I don't know how far EuroDIG can take this kind of role at the European Union and to comment on proposals and how far this exists on the European level. Maybe this is something EuroDIG could look into and if possible, take a more active role there.
Okay, point taken. And yeah, actually we rely a little bit also on the community to bring up those issues if there is a regulation in place to bring it up to the EuroDIG agenda. Now, obviously, EuroDIG is happening as an event only 1 time per year, but these kind of formats like the Extra could be a good platform to discuss legislation that is happening throughout the year and to deliver input. That's indeed something we should certainly look into a bit closer.
Yeah, and the development that I really think is a good development is that we don't see national governments making a lot of laws, but we see this being shifted towards the European and even to the UN level. So I think it very much makes sense to have this on this level, because well, having all kinds of national regulations will only increase the risk of internet fragmentation. But of course, we have to make sure that those global rules are good rules. This is still a very important issue, of course.
Okay, are there any other questions? Then I would ask you to raise your hand or speak up as you wish. Then let me ask to the authors, including Nadia, not only Farzaneh and Jörn. Is there a final comment that one of you would like to make?
I can make a final comment, which is I think that now with the upcoming Future on the Summit, the recent publication of Policy Brief 3 from the United Nations Secretary General on meaningful youth participation, it is incredibly important for us to focus on how we can make sure that youth are participating, not only in EuroDIG, EuroDIG, but also other structures and follow through on meaningful youth participation, because it's now such a priority topic. And we do want to ensure that the knowledge transfer of people like Farzaneh and Jörn is coming towards young people, and how we can ensure that we engage them more in these kind of EuroDIG extras or other processes. Because I think that without their participation, we're going to see that we'll have a gap in knowledge of so many interesting things that has happened on the internet that we're not taking over. And I think this is an opportune time to really focus on that. And I'm asking the EuroDIG community, the EuroDIG board as well, to please, if you see a youth digger, go and say hi and encourage your colleagues to include them in conversations. If you're going out for dinner, take a young person with you. because it's these dinners, it's these drinks where you choose to have a conversation. They may not choose, or they may not be able to contribute to the conversation, but just allowing them to listen to what you are talking about. They can learn so much about how the internet governance sphere works, whether or not that is relationships between organizations, whether or not that is about particular topics important. Just allowing them to be in the room as part, and encouraging them as well to get to meet people and understanding the topic will create that change. And I think that is as much as we like the idea of creating mentorship programs, I think that this informal, just one moment of your time can really make a difference. And this is my request, that when we go into EuroDIG 2024, I walk around with stickers to say, hey, I'm interested to meet a youth digger. So I put a sticker on your badge, so that we can come and talk to you, that you're a safe person that's interested, and that we're encouraging people to integrate into the community, and that they then become also the people that future youth diggers then come to be excited about at the IGF, at ICANN spaces, at RIPE NCC spaces, and beyond those, and that we can then find each other. So thank you all very much.
I have one last. So I think that with regards to human rights and the internet, we should go back to that golden age of maximizing human rights, and not panic in the middle of crisis and hamper human rights, and compromise and balance human rights. And I think, yeah, EuroDIG is can be like the main champion advocate for this, because they started it, and we should not and we should like continue it without fear, and kind of like protect and thrive human rights on the internet.
Well, I think this is a good statement. I wouldn't go that far myself, but I think we have to make sure that this balance between human rights and government interests is a very sensitive balance, and that we need to make sure that it doesn't tip in the wrong direction. So I agree that we have to put more attention on human rights, and on all aspects of human rights, including freedom of speech, including the freedom aspects, and not only the protection aspects that are tend to be used to justify limiting measures that might be motivated by other things too.
Okay, I think these were really interesting final remarks. A lot of work on our plate now, and maybe you can try to frame also those ideas in a proposal for our call for issue. Let me remind you, it's still open until the end of the year, and it's good to have those things on paper, not just here on the record, but also somewhere on paper and on the website, so that we can also work with it and share with it, share it with the others, and include it into the program, possibly a discussion about it. So thank you very much. We are almost at the end of our session, and since there are no other hands for the time being, I would say that's the end of the session. It's recorded. We will distribute it in our newsletter next week, so that those who did register could not make it, or others who are interested could watch the recording. I think it was worth doing it, and I would like to thank you very much again for being with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I wanted to express my thanks to the EuroDIG team that made this publication possible. It's not only the authors who put a lot of work into this, so thank you, Rainer and Sandra, for making this possible.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Our pleasure.